Hi, I'm Steve. Welcome to my shop. This video I'm going to share with you my most recent project, which is the repair of some extensively water damaged furniture. And this furniture, I'll show pictures over here, but this cabinet, it was made of teak. It was custom built for my client's parents when they lived in Hong Kong in the 1980s. And when he inherited it, it was placed in an environmentally controlled storage unit, which unfortunately, I guess environmentally controlled doesn't include roof leaks, because they had a roof leak and it landed on top of this. There was a cardboard box, a plastic bin on top of this particular piece of furniture. Water puddled up. The cardboard kept it in contact with this, didn't really have much opportunity to dry out. Stain finishes, washed over the sides, discolored the side finishes. This project had a lot of challenges. I had originally planned on using a track saw and separating the top, frame and all, from the base of the cabinet, rebuilding that, reattaching it, finishing it, and moving on. When I got to my local, which is a 2-hour drive from me, supplier that had genuine teak in stock, I culled through the best he had and brought it back, and the quality of the wood just wasn't anywhere close to what was in the cabinet. So I made a shift and decided to just remove the plywood portion of the cabinet. And there were quite a few surprises in that, but that was somewhat of a fortuitous decision because it saved a track saw blade, because I ran into a lot of metal, nails going both directions. You're going to see that in the video. Sparks were flying, and so I feel fortunate that it was only a router bit that was wasted as opposed to a saw blade. During this process, I kind of started referring to this cabinet project as being a Murphy's Law cabinet, because it seemed like everything that could possibly go wrong was going wrong. I had a phase converter failure in the middle of this. It resulted in me using alternate tools to try to stay on at least some semblance of a schedule, as my phase converter parts made a scenic tour of what seemed to be the entire United States. And I ended up deciding to, all right, I need to get a jump on matching the color of the top to the rest of the cabinet. And as a result, I pre-finished the top before it was glued in place in the cabinet, because I did not have my shaper available. And that set a sequence of events which caused me to strip finish back several times. And I wished I hadn't done it, and hindsight's always 20/20, but I thought I'd share these experiences with you. So without further ado, let's just get to this repair. Okay, so I've run into, there's still moisture down here, and I've taken, probably about 8 millimeters or so off the field. I found some plastic tubing here and veneer tape. So this was probably shop laid up plywood, which might explain why it's so thick. It's about 7/8 of an inch or 22 millimeters or so thick, but this is kind of interesting. It's plastic tubing. I wonder if that had something to do with how they fabricated this plywood. Maybe they had to drill a vacuum in here. Running into metal, so I backed off the depth. Boy, there's some pretty healthy nails. I saw some sparks come in here. Yeah, I'll tell you what, they did a good job of hiding it on the from the edges, because it looks like it's nails driven in that way. So. These are common nails with a head. Go figure. construction looked like a bunch of layers of probably 5mm thick Luan laminated on top of each other. Looked like there were probably 4 layers at least. There was some type of couple of holes here with a tube that I think is what they used to vacuum veneer this on. All it was installed on the top. Surprised me there were nails in this trim molding. I knew there were nails coming up from this bottom strip to support the top, but got some more cleanup. I've got probably about 3 hours into the top removal. Ruined the route a bit, which I did not expect. I did not expect nails coming through here because they did a very good job of hiding them. Except there's a spot there I can see. That was probably just for pulling the nail through the backside. Okay, so here I'm making the plywood core. I've got 2 pieces of Baltic birch, one 15mm, one 6mm. Because the total thickness I needed was about 22mm. What I found was that the rabbet depth on the around the perimeter of the cabinet was not a consistent depth, so you'll see how I fixed it later. I didn't really show that in the video, but I'm just laminated 2 pieces of Baltic birch ply here. And then putting in the vacuum press. The adhesive I was using was on top of the piece is a product called a vacuum net. It just basically improves the air removal. And here I'm just sizing the panel. I decided the original panel just had exposed ply edges on the raised field, and I've sized this panel to band it with teak. Here I'm setting up the Fritz and Franz jig for ripping narrow pieces. This is for the banding to go around the plywood core for the top. And here I'm using the Martin Miter X. This will be what I use to cut the miters for those pieces. Just finally, I find this more efficient than angling the fence on the crosscut table because, well, first this one has a chip breaker, and as you swing that fence on the regular outrigger away, it swings very far away from the blade and doesn't really give much product support. And here I'm fitting up, I'm sneaking up on the correct length for this, for the banding. And I'm going to trim a little bit off that miter. What this Miter X really does need is a micro adjust, which it does not have. But it does have a compensation scale on it, so length compensation scale for the various angles. And here I'm just checking the fit of the piece I just trimmed. And I'm just looking for how well the miters fit on each corner. If there's a gap or whether it's too short or too long. And this one looks good. So now I've got my length set, and now I can go cut all my other pieces. I did cut some spares because you never know when you cut something too short. It's really hard to lengthen it forward. Hit the camera. My focus in all this really wasn't the camera. I lost the battery several times. I forgot to hit record. My focus was on the project itself. And here I'm just gluing the banding on. The two sides parallel with the clamps are already glued in place. They're slightly proud on both the top and the bottom. And what I'm doing is checking to make sure it's just sitting slightly proud as I tighten the clamps. Now I'm set up with the lipping planer. This is a Lamello Cantex, which is no longer made. There are two others. Adler made one. It's no longer made as far as I know, and the only one that's currently made now is the Veritech. Now what I found with the fence on this, it doesn't turn corners very well. But it does give more stability. So I typically glue two sides, then come mill it flush with the material top, and then come back and get the other side. And this is the second side now. And here I'm just taking, there's 4 veneer sheets here. I've marked them to length, and I'm going to be using a veneer saw to cross cut. The other end has about 5 inches of splits in it, which I ended up using for a sample panel. I should have made more. And you'll note that I just turned and looked over my shoulder. I was hearing something abnormal. And I think what I was doing, I don't really remember, but it may have been the phase converter noise I was hearing. And that may have been the start of the failure that I experienced. That didn't pick up on video, but it's coming up here shortly. Yeah, here's where the noise on the phase converter, you hear that surging noise. What I've got installed on the saw is it's an Eigner saw boy. It's basically an L fence. And my veneer jig is what I use to flush trim the veneer, and basically it's just sandwiched pieces of MDF indexed with dowels. And I used to use this with a router, but I often experienced a great deal of tear out on the veneer, so I just started using this with a saw, and it worked great. In the past, I have used tape to tape the veneers together, but here I'm just measuring for constant width. I've got 4 sheets in this pack. It was real close. I wasn't sure whether I needed 3 or 4, so I went ahead and cut 4 just in case I needed it. And now I just put those marks on the jig, or the veneer sandwich, and I've got the saw running on this because it does have a brake on it. You start and stop that saw too many times and you'll trip the breaker on the brake, and I don't like opening the cabinet to do that because I got to remove screws. So now I have perfectly edged veneers that I can join together, which is coming up next. Now I've decided to book match this. And I usually either use masking tape or painter's tape to hold the seam together on one side. It's just easier to do it this way than it is to try to keep things aligned with that veneer tape, which is pretty much a two-handed operation there, or you need 3 hands. And then once you got the seams all pulled together with painter's tape, just flip it over, and I install veneer tape on the other side. And my little container there is just a Rubbermaid bowl with a sponge in it that's filled with water, and the Holy veneer tape, water activated adhesive. And I like to stretch across the seam first, and then I'll put a piece of veneer tape down the complete length of the seam. And it tears sometimes, so doesn't mean that you can't use it though. I think the hold tape is meant for sanding away, make it easier to sand. I never sand veneer tape away, but I like the holey tape because you can see what's beneath it, and it seems to take being resaturated with water easier, makes for easy removal later. What I find is my fingers get real sticky with this adhesive on that. I think it's a hide glue, or something similar to that. It is definitely reversible and water soluble. Now here I'm using a PPR adhesive. You mix it up. If it's too aged, sometimes if your adhesive gets too old, it's in powder form, you mix it with water real well. Sometimes if it gets too old, it's like trying to dissolve sand in water. Don't ask me how I know. But I like this adhesive because it has a tendency to not bleed through the veneer, and it has no creep. It creates a rigid glue line. And now just spread it out, make sure I don't have any big bubbles. And into the veneer vacuum bag it goes. You'll notice that this is not a balanced panel. My experience with veneer has been for over 25 years. I've never had an issue not balancing a panel. And this one, I didn't see the need for it. Plus, I didn't really want the thickness. And I really like this part. Pulling something out of the vacuum bag. And now I'm just wetting the veneer tape with that same sponge I used to activate it to begin with. A card scraper comes helpful here because it's really hard to get it started coming off. But once you get it started and something once you get it started, you got something to grab onto, it usually peels off fairly easily as long as you don't become overly aggressive with it. It's just a mild solution of water and trisodium phosphate. Just to see if I can just get that dirt and stuff off of this. On the bottom rail. and here I'm trying to clean that off. It was very hard. Denatured alcohol would not dissolve it, and so I ended up going after it to try to level that out with a card scraper. What I did not want to do is remove the color because I did not want to get into mismatching that color. So it looked like orange shellac, dewaxed orange shellac to me. So I was just very gentle so I didn't go too far. Just removed the ridges, and I went over it with a rubbing pad later with shellac, and it blended out. You can hardly tell it's there. And this is the other side of the panel, other side of the cabinet. I just decided to brush on some dewaxed orange shellac to try to even out the color in that panel. And my phase converter is still out of service, so I have opted to use a track saw to cut the panel to size. Just trying to maintain some semblance of a schedule. And I'm using the bench dog square because I have not only Festool rails, but I also have Mafel rails, and this particular unit works with both. And this is the Festool saw with the scoring motor on it. I used it on this just because this was a critical cut to me. I'd already had a lot invested in this particular panel, and I wanted as good a cut as I could. I would have used scoring had my phase converter been in service, and I could use the sliding table saw. And here I'm using the Festool, I don't know, it's 1 or 5-inch edge sanders with an angle edge sanding attachment. Normally I wouldn't use this in the shop. I would be using the Kundig with the veneer sanding side. And here's one of the nails. You can notice that it has a head on it. I think I tried to get it with some diagonal cutters. It just wasn't cooperating. So I was trying to get it away so I can get a pair of channel locks on it so I could pull that nail out, because I've got to repair this portion because the material's split. Whether it's split as a result of me disassembling the lid or the top, or it split during the initial construction, I don't know. But this one was a bit of a struggle to get out, and I needed to glue a piece of wood in that place, and there goes the head. Once you can get a grip on it, it'll come out. And now I'm gluing that piece that kind of broke away back in place. But you can still see there's quite a bit of material missing, and what's coming up is the repair of that. Clamping was a challenge on this because the round over on the opposite side, so I just used a cutoff from the top as a clamp and wedged it in from the opposite side of the cabinet. Worked out really well. Now I'm using the Festool MFS, which is unfortunately is no longer available in the US. I think it's still available in Europe. But what I'm going to do is cut out a tapered portion where that damaged wood is, and I've got some teak, and I end up using one of the cutoffs from the top to actually fill that void. So I've got it set up. I'm using a 1/8 inch brass setup bar to set an offset for that jig. It'll actually be sitting at an angle so that I can take a router with a guide bushing and a straight or a spiral router bit to trim that material off and get me a good glue surface. And here I'm just securing it so it doesn't move on me. I'll also put a clamp on the side for one of those side edges such that it doesn't move left to right. And here I'm using the MFK trim router, and I've got this thing to the maximum depth it will go with that bit. And you'll see very quickly that it won't go quite deep enough. So what I ended up doing, I ended up resetting the router and making another pass to get that damaged material out. I wanted as much glue surface for the top as I could, and I wasn't quite there. So here's my second pass. I just pulled a little bit further out of the collet at the max depth setting, and I got deep enough. So what I didn't show is the cleanup with the chisel, but here's a piece of the offcut. I cut that off camera, and I'm just gluing it in place. And using those spring clamps again, which are top offcuts, top offcuts. And I'm tapping it in place to make sure it's fully seated in the miter. And here I'm resetting the MFS. I've left it set overnight in the clamps, and now I'm going to trim this, restore that rabbet or rebate on the top. Now that depth of that is not consistent depth-wise, and that was kind of an issue because the top, when I set it, was just not quite, it wouldn't go quite deep enough. And I didn't show that in the video, so here I'm just using the same router setup, and I'm going at it again, just trimming off the excess. It's basically a tapered wedge glued in place. And you'll notice that I end up having to pull the bit out even further because it left a little ledge there. Okay, and here I got my phase converter back in service, and you'll notice that I pre-finished the top. Something that I regret significantly, because the wheels from that pressure module are hard plastic. When you get anything under them, and I did, which are wood chips, it dents the finish, which is shellac. I was just trying to get a jump on the for time, and I regret that because I ended up taking that finish down to wood several times. This one, it was for the dents in the finish, and you'll see when I clamp it to the cabinet, it also created some dents, and it left wood embedded in the finish, and I was like, shellac's pretty soft, at least for about the first 30 days or so. So I will not make that mistake again. I'm not using a power feeder here because I did not want to mar the finish. So as you see, it's kind of a moot point, or as you will see, it's kind of a moot point. I did make this top slightly larger than the original, about 2 millimeters each direction, because I wanted to make sure I covered up the portion of the rabbit if there was any damage there. And here I'm checking the fit, and I find that this very large tenon is trying to fit in a slightly unsquare hole. So I'm just marking where I need to take this finish off. And here you see how I stain the underside, and you see where I've taken a rabbiting plane and kind of trimmed off excess so that lid would, so the top would go completely into the rebates on top, and I'm just using a shoulder plane to square that off. Didn't want to bust out that miter too much, so you see me changing directions back and forth, and I just did this until I got a snug fit like what you would want for a mortise and tenon. And this was the only corner I had to do this with. Everything else was looking good. And I glued this in place with hide glue. I used some cauls, and it turned out there was wood debris, or frayed sawdust that was from a different project, and it got embedded into the finish as well. It was a pretty good match up to this point anyway. And not satisfied with the dents that were there, I decided to add more dents, both front and back. And here I am applying, I've noticed that I've taken that back down to raw wood, and I have filled it, and I'm applying a seal coat over the wood filler. I tried 3 different wood fillers on this. The one I like best is the oldest, which was Balin's Poro Pack, and I don't even think they make that anymore. Actually, I think Balin's has been bought out by Mohawk, but just to get a seal coat on there. And here I'm applying toner. This is a Mohawk reddish brown, or red walnut toner, I think. It's transparent. I made a mistake and bought the opaque. I'll never do that again. But the transparent, I really like that. It allows you much better tone control. And then you can rub your hand across it, and some of the color will transfer to your hand. So I took some 4/0 steel wool, rubbed it out. Now I'm taking a tack cloth and wiping that down, any debris from the steel wool or the colorant. And now I'm applying a seal coat over that, because I found that if you rub it manually, it will come off. Not very easily, but it's a lacquer-based product, and this what I'm spraying is shellac. And since it was so warm, I added 10% N-butyl alcohol as a retardant for the seal coats. And I've got a number of coats on this now, and I'm just pulling this off so that I can blend with the rest of the cabinet. And I do spray some more shellac over that, just trying to minimize overspray. And here I'm rubbing out, I'm leveling it. I'm using P1200 grit paper, wet dry paper, with a felt block. And the lubricant is a 50-50 mixture of mineral oil and mineral spirits. And I think I may have decided that wasn't cutting as well as it should, so I ended up using water, which will cut through much faster. It just creates a bigger mess. And here I'm starting the polishing and rubbing out process. I'm using pumice and a pounce pad. And this is 2F. I took this through 4F as well. I didn't show both of them. It's basically the same process. Again, the 50-50 mix of mineral spirits and mineral oil. It's a very good lubricant for this part, just not for the wet dry paper. And I just like to go around and just kind of make a slurry all over the top. When you use these blocks, I'm using a felt block, and I have a felt block for each different grit. You don't want to take your 2F block and use it with 4F or rotten stone, because it will it holds the slurry and abrasives, so you don't want to do that. This does a good job. I really like this process. Just have to be real careful around the edges. I had taken this finish down several times because I'd burned through it several times right down to the toner coat. And with the 2F, I'm just using a shop towel to wipe that down. And here I'm using rotten stone. And what I found with this, the gloss was way too high. After this process, I'd taken, basically delivered it to my customer. We set it next to it, this cabinet's twin, and the gloss was way too high. So I brought it back to the shop and backed that sheen down to with 4F pumice, and it was much better. Much more of a kind of a semi-gloss as opposed to a gloss finish. And then using a microfiber towel to get the abrasive off, and I also used a different towel with a spray cleaner on the towel only, and these are the final results. I'm not sure how good the picture is going to be. Now, these are not the back down sheen. These were the ones that I had polished with rotten stone. So you can see how reflective that surface is. But I did not take any photographs of it after I had backed that sheen down.